BBC News. Hello, I'm Tom Watts. More than 100,000 people in the UK have now died with COVID-19, the highest number in Europe. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, expressed his sadness at the figure.
I am deeply sorry for every life that has been lost, and of course as Prime Minister I take full responsibility for everything that the government has done. What I can tell you is that we truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life.
Critics accuse Mr Johnson of being too slow to impose lockdowns and of failing to protect care homes or to organise effective track and trace systems. Keir Starmer is leader of the opposition Labour Party.
It's a national tragedy. This is a milestone that nobody wanted to hit. That number of 100,000 is twice the number we lost in the Blitz, and it's the size of small towns across the United Kingdom.
President Biden has set out details of his plans to tackle racial inequality in the US. In a speech at the White House, he promised to make confronting the problem a key part of his administration's policies. Mr. Biden said more needed to be done to help people of colour who'd been disproportionately affected by the coronavirus pandemic.
We are not just morally deprived because of systemic racism, we're also less prosperous, we're less successful, we're less secure. So we must change. I know it's going to take time, but I know we can do it. And I firmly believe the nation is ready to change. But government has to change as well. We need to make equity and justice part of what we do every day.
The veteran diplomat Antony Blinken has been confirmed as US Secretary of State in a Senate vote. Mr. Blinken has promised to restore American leadership and repair alliances strained by Donald Trump's America First approach. Gary O'Donoghue in Washington has more.
Joe Biden said when he won the presidency that America was back, and what he meant by that was America would start to re-engage in the multilateral institutions and relationships that Donald Trump had retreated from, and Tony Blinken is very much in that mould. He's career foreign service, he's a pro-European if you like, so there will be this collective sigh of relief in capitals in Europe and around the world that he has been confirmed, because they will be able to deal with America in a much more predictable way than they've been able to in the last 4 years.
Joe Biden has held his first phone call with Vladimir Putin since taking office. The White House said the president had raised concerns about the poisoning of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny and Russian election interference. Moscow said both sides had agreed to extend a nuclear arms treaty that was due to expire earlier this month. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC in London. 100 US senators are being sworn in to act as jurors in Donald Trump's impeachment trial. The former president stands accused of inciting insurrection after his supporters stormed the Congress building earlier this month. The trial will get underway in earnest in 2 weeks' time. Democrats need 17 Republican senators to join them to convict Mr. Trump. The Peruvian army has deployed armoured vehicles and more than 1,000 troops along its border with Ecuador in an operation aimed at deterring the illegal entry of illegal migrants. Peru said in recent weeks it had located more than 30 routes controlled by gangs near the northwestern city of Tumbes. Most of the migrants are from Venezuela, some 2,000 kilometres away. President Muhammadu Buhari has replaced his most senior military chiefs as Nigeria's security problems deepen. Mr. Buhari gave no reason for the change of personnel. Grant Ferret reports.
In a tweet, Mr. Buhari said it accepted the immediate resignation of the head of the defence staff along with the chiefs of the Army, Air Force and Navy. The calls for him to bring in new faces have been getting louder as insecurity and lawlessness worsened nationwide. A decade-long insurgency by Boko Haram Islamists based in the northeast has continued, despite Mr. Buhari's assertions soon after taking office that the militants had technically been defeated. Elsewhere in Nigeria, there have been numerous kidnappings for ransom in the northwest and the Delta region in the south, as well as long-running violent disputes over access to land and grazing rights across the centre of the country.
The English Premier League football side Chelsea have named German coach Thomas Tuchel as their new manager. Tuchel, who was previously in charge of Paris Saint-Germain and Borussia Dortmund, said he couldn't wait to compete in what he called the most exciting league in football. He replaces Frank Lampard, who was sacked yesterday morning. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to NewsHour. It's live from the BBC World Service in London. I'm Tim Franks. A year after we began talking about the possibility of a pandemic, the virus continues to dominate our lives, and once again this programme will be hearing about the frustration in the pace of vaccinations across the European Union despite its wealth and heft, the UK breaching 100,000 COVID deaths, the Brazilian Amazon ravaged by a surge in cases, and an investigation into where it all began in Wuhan. Let's start in the EU, which has been criticised and which in turn is criticising others for the creaky rollout of vaccines across the 27 member states. The European Commission has been coordinating the purchase of the jabs. That way, says the Commission, it avoids competition between member states. It should mean that it's a powerful negotiator in getting good deals with pharmaceutical companies. That's the theory. But as of now, the United Kingdom, for example, has given initial doses to 10 out of every 100 people. The EU has so far vaccinated fewer than 2 per 100. EU member states and EU officials are now saying that vaccine manufacturers haven't delivered the amount that they promised. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, vented her frustration today.
The European Union and others helped with money. Large sums were invested to build research capacities and production facilities early. Europe invested billions to help develop the world's first COVID-19 vaccines, to create a truly global common good. And now the companies must deliver. They must honor their obligations. And this is why we will set up a vaccine export transparency mechanism. Europe is determined to contribute to this global common good. But it also means business.
The vaccine manufacturers, both Pfizer and AstraZeneca, have said that they're falling below their supply targets because of production or distribution problems. But patience is clearly wearing thin among politicians. Véronique Trier-Lenoir is a French member of the European Parliament. She's an oncologist by training, and she sits on the Parliament's Public Health Committee.
What is unfair is pharmaceutical firm not to follow its commitments. If AstraZeneca has contracted with the European Union to give a certain amount of doses at a certain price with certain conditions of liability, then the commitment has to be followed. The European Commission is reacting against what looks like a contract being kind of betrayed. So first of all, she wants notifications of what is happening to the products manufactured in the European Union. Then she will probably ask for controls. And the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, said he will not hesitate to attend legal actions if the contracts were not followed.
Airfinity is a London-based life sciences company that's been collecting data on vaccines. Rasmus Beck-Hansen is the chief executive. Why is the UK and even the US appearing to do much better than the EU in its vaccination programme?
The key bottleneck we're seeing is really the supply of vaccines. The UK have more vaccines available than the EU has managed to secure, which is really a result of decisions that have been made over the last year or so. If you compare the kind of, let's say, vaccination strategy between the EU and the UK, we see some very significant differences. The UK has decided to invest more significantly in early stage R&D, also setting up more production facilities, more clinical trials than the EU has. I mean, some of the numbers we're looking at is quite big. As an example, UK has 28 pounds per capita, so per person has invested. EU's is 4, so there's a kind of a 7x difference in some of the funding that went into the vaccine programs. And I think that's actually the key reason why the EU is now in a difficult situation, because they don't have production capacity within the EU to fully meet the need.
So are you suggesting that, in a sense, they either didn't bet on the right vaccine candidates, or that they didn't ask up front for enough doses from Pfizer and AstraZeneca, rather than, as has, I think, been suggested, that somehow these companies are reneging on promises that they made?
The key thing that's really determining this at the moment is production capacity. How many doses is it possible for these candidates to produce, and critically, where they're being produced? And the EU has made some early bets, as you say, on vaccine candidates, especially Sanofi and GSK, that didn't turn out very well. But the candidates that have turned out to be successful, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, none of them had significant investment in production within the EU. And that's really why EU is in a difficult position.
Pfizer does have a factory in Belgium. How far could the European Union, again, this seemed to be what the European Commission President was hinting at, how far could they impose some sort of export controls to try and stop that Pfizer vaccine being taken out of the EU?
Pfizer has this production facility, but it's worth bearing in mind that that is a smaller production facility. Capacity for production in Europe is much smaller than it is in the US. The US is producing 4 times more vaccines from Pfizer than the EU is. Whether we could then see some of these export restrictions, I think that's a very real risk, and that's one of the reasons why these domestic productions are so critical in a vaccine strategy, and why you're seeing all over the world countries scaling up their domestic production. And of course, the EU and the UK is in a delicate situation given Brexit and everything, so I wouldn't take any of this off the table, but I obviously don't know what the final decisions will be.
The other thing that we've heard, at least hinted at by some European politicians, is that these pharmaceutical companies, although the AstraZeneca one is supposed to be made not for profit, that they're chasing the best prices, and that actually the European Union's great competitive advantage normally as a trading bloc, because it is such a powerhouse, it can negotiate the best price for its consumers, that actually that's played against it. And it means that now that it's a seller's market, that these pharmaceutical companies are more interested in supplying countries such as the US and the UK, which are happy to pay more.
I think there is some hints that might be the case. If you compare the Pfizer price from the EU is paying around $14 per dose, whereas a country like Israel, who've gotten a lot of Pfizer doses, are paying $28, twice as much. The US is paying 19, so also more. We don't know the exact number for the UK, but also likely more than that. So that could very well play into this. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is also what is the timing of these deals, when were they made? And what we saw in the fall was that the EU dragged their feet because they were negotiating these terms. It simply took longer. That's also what we hear from the manufacturers. It was more complicated to make the deals with the EU, and therefore the sequencing of the deals, in other words, the sooner we make the deal, the more likely you are to get the first vaccines, seem to play in, and all of this disfavor the EU at the moment.
Rasmus Beck-Hansen, the CEO of the life sciences company Affinity. Away from the pandemic now and head to India, and police have clashed with farmers protesting in Delhi after tens of thousands converged on the capital to reignite their demonstrations against agricultural reforms. The mass protest turned violent after crowds broke through police barricades. Farmers fear that these reforms to the agricultural sector will damage their livelihoods. Today's protest was the biggest yet and coincided with India's Republic Day celebrations. Here's Virginie Vaidyanathan.
As dawn broke outside Delhi, farmers from neighbouring states gathered on their way to the Indian capital.
On this highway where we're standing, hundreds of farmers are walking towards us. They're carrying Indian flags. And also on the road are tractors as they head towards Delhi for today's rally.
Only the Prime Minister is saying this is a good law. The entire country opposes it.
There's a mood of celebration here. Farmers are driving past on their tractors. Some tractors have balloons hung to them, flags. As you can hear, farmers are cheering and chanting, punching their fists in the air. A mood of jubilance.
But it didn't take long for the celebration to turn to chaos. As farmers tried to enter the capital, some drove tractors into police barricades. Others pushed them over with their bare hands. As clashes broke out between police and protesters, tear gas was deployed. Mass scenes of disorder played out on the streets of Delhi and on TV screens across India.
Saurabh, can you tell us what's happening right there?
A senior policeman blamed the farmers for what happened, saying that police had had discussions with them in advance to ensure the rally went off peacefully.
Farmer protesters didn't follow the assigned route. They started the rally before the scheduled time, and there were some instances of violence, and public property was destroyed.
Today's violence has followed weeks of peaceful protest by tens of thousands of farmers who've been camped at Delhi's border. They're angry at the government's proposed farm laws. Officials say the reforms will benefit farmers by allowing them to sell directly to big business. But protesters like Sukhdev Singh fear the guaranteed prices they get for some crops will eventually disappear.
These laws will have an effect on anyone who eats. If corporates are allowed to come in, they will buy from us at a very low price, and we'll lose our livelihoods.
Marching to the awakening song of... At the other side of the city, the country's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, was marking a national holiday, Republic Day. Even in times of COVID, the country pulled off a colourful military parade to celebrate the day India became a sovereign state. These soldiers are the torchbearers of the... But the festivities were overshadowed by the farmers' protests, which have become the biggest challenge facing Prime Minister Modi. Many say India's populist leader misread this crisis. Just walking by a bus which has broken windows, shattered fragments of glass still lying on the pavement. This is where some of the worst clashes took place between police and protesters at the start of the day. This is normally a very busy intersection in the centre of India's capital city. It remains on a state of high alert, with a huge police presence here. As dozens of police officers patrol the streets, many here are reflecting back on the events of the day. After multiple rounds of talks, farmers and the government have failed to come to an agreement. It's unclear what will bring about a resolution. The farmers say they won't give up until the laws are repealed.
That was Rajini Vaidyanathan reporting from a very noisy Delhi. This is NewsHour from the BBC. Coming up on the programme, the number of coronavirus deaths in the United Kingdom has passed 100,000. It's the highest number in Europe. We'll try and make that staggering number more of a personal story.
It's a very strange grief. I mean, being around family, being around friends, you can't do that. We haven't been able to properly be together as a family. And with Sylvia in particular, she, I think, struggled the most because she's not in London. Everything that she's had to do and see us, and even going to visit my father in the cemetery is through FaceTime.
The interview with Ida and Sylvia, bereaved sisters, in 20 minutes. Our headlines this hour, that the number of coronavirus deaths in the UK has surpassed 100,000, and the EU has told the makers of vaccines against COVID-19 they must deliver. You're with the BBC World Service and live from London NewsHour with me, Tim Franks. As Brazil battles a deadly second wave of the coronavirus, it's the Amazonas region which has been hit particularly hard, with oxygen supplies running out in the capital Manaus and many other more isolated cities. As with the European Union, the vaccination programme has also been criticised, with experts warning there's simply not been enough planning to ensure enough doses are provided for the country, where more than 200,000 have so far died from COVID-19. Now, South American correspondent Katie Watson has this report from the Amazon.
Outside the field hospital in the town of Manacaparu, a team is putting oxygen cylinders in the back of 2 pickup trucks. An hour away from Manaus, along the banks of the Amazon River, The community is clearly feeling the effects of a shortage that's seen hospitals in the state run out of oxygen and patients suffocate to death at home. Manacaparu was one of the worst affected cities in all of Brazil in the first wave. This second wave is no better, but today at least, inside the field hospital, it's buzzing as health workers line up to receive their first dose of the Chinese vaccine, Coronavac. We can now work feeling a bit more relaxed, says one doctor. It gives us a bit of peace. The city really needs this vaccine, he tells me. Not just those who are high risk, but everyone, to bring the virus back under control. But on the day we visited, the first day of vaccinations, just 25% of what was needed for health workers had been delivered. There are concerns vaccines aren't being rolled out across the country quick enough. This at a time when the second wave is proving so deadly. For so many, the challenges continue. In Manaus, Marcel is just back from picking up some oxygen cylinders. He's helping 5 people who've got COVID and have breathing problems, putting some of them up in a private retreat on the outskirts of the city. In one room is Idson. In his 30s, he's got an oxygen mask on and a tall cylinder by his side. He's getting better, thankfully. In the next room, though, Orio is 82 years old and struggling. Curled up in bed, he doesn't yet know that his wife has just passed away from the virus. She was admitted to hospital just a few days ago. Marcel is finding it hard to process it all.
I'm on duty all the time. I sleep with fear of being woken by my WhatsApp and wake up fearful of WhatsApp because everyone is asking for oxygen. A person I know died. They said it was lack of oxygen. I said no, it wasn't a lack of oxygen. It was because he didn't come to me. If he'd spoken to me, he wouldn't have died. I would have helped him if I had known. There was no need. He died unnecessarily, suffocated.
At the gas company in Manaus, where people queue for oxygen, there's a big crowd of families waiting patiently. But there are also lots of people handing out food and drink for those who need it. Katia Salza is one of them, a taxi driver who, along with her colleagues, has been volunteering in the wake of Manaus's collapse.
Authorities have forgotten the states that are farthest from big capitals, such as Rio and São Paulo. And it's getting worse. What's happening here is the result of government irresponsibility, the lack of oxygen, the lack of beds. It's an omission of public duty, not just state, but federal as well.
Não só estadual, né, mas federal também.
Indeed, this weekend, thousands of people took to the streets to call for President Jair Bolsonaro to be impeached, angry with the way he's handled the pandemic. What was interesting was it wasn't just people from the left, but conservative groups who had once backed Bolsonaro too. The situation in Manaus has alarmed Brazilians everywhere.
That was Katie Watson reporting from the Amazon. Now, some promising news about another potentially deadly disease, sleeping sickness or trypanosomiasis. It's caused by a parasite and transmitted by tsetse flies. The main agent of control has been through insecticides, which do come with some ecological downsides. But a new study published today in the journal PLOS Biology suggests another way. Alvaro Acosta Serrano led the research. He's at the School of Tropical Medicine in the English city of Liverpool.
We studied trypanosomiasis, which is caused by a parasite called trypanosomes. Trypanosomes are transmitted by a fly called tsetse fly. It is very well known in many African countries, mainly in the sub-Saharan region. And because they are blood feeders, they have to digest many proteins and metabolites that are coming with this blood. One important molecule is tyrosine. So tyrosine is essential for the life of these insects. But what we discovered is that if we interrupt the breakdown of this amino acid, then it becomes fatal. So we exploited this by using a drug that is currently used to treat rare metabolic diseases, also affecting the tyrosine degradation in humans. One of them is nitisinone. And what happened is that when nitisinone is supplied to these insects, they die within a few hours. So we validated this in our facilities at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And then our collaborators in Kenya from ECP Institute, they supplied the drug to animals and then exposed it to tsetse flies, and they die as a result of it.
I realise from what you've said that the studies have just been in animals, but is this a case of just people taking this drug regularly? If, for example, they were to go out into the field, that sort of thing, or is it a one-off? It's not like a vaccination, presumably.
No, and that's not the intention of it.
Right.
There is no need for that. We are not necessarily suggesting that this should be routinely given to people in endemic areas. This could be used in outbreak situations and in regions where tsetse control strategies are not working well. There are some ethical questions behind giving these kind of altruistic drugs to people. Less than 1% of the tsetse flies in endemic areas are carrying the deadly parasite. So there is really no need to submit people to this kind of treatment for only a minor percentage of exposure to a deadly infectious bite.
It sounds fascinating. I mean, could you see this potentially being used against mosquitoes?
That's correct. So I should say that this is very exciting time for people studying trypanosomiasis and trying to control this disease. The human version of it, also known as sleeping sickness, is supposed to be eliminated in 5 to 10 years' time. So this methodology could help accelerate this elimination goal for sleeping sickness. Now, for animal trypanosomiasis, this is a completely different story. It's a huge problem in Africa. It contributes to poverty and all sorts of problems. So when we treat animals, thinking about controlling tsetse, what happens is that mosquitoes and other arthropods that transmit diseases like ticks, for example, they also feed in farm animals. So when you treat, let's say, topically, this drug, which doesn't have to be ingested, but it could be also put on the animal skin, you are actually controlling several of those insects with one strategy. And that's a huge advantage of this. And it only affects blood-feeding insects. It doesn't affect pollinators and bumblebees, as we reported in our paper. So instead of spraying vast territories with insecticides, for example, which will kill inevitably other insects. And importantly, this is a major contributor for the serious problems of insecticide resistance. We need to reduce the impact that insecticide resistance is happening in those areas.
Alvaro Costa-Serrano from the School of Tropical Medicine in Liverpool. You're with NewsHour.
I hope you can stay with us here on the BBC World Service. In 30 minutes, Republican voters in Idaho reflect on President Trump's legacy.
I will miss Donald Trump. The things that he did and the way he conducted the country, I think, is better than any president for a long time.
Then we're in the studio with the composer, Max Richter.
Music performance, music making is this wonderful real-time laboratory. It's an experiment. It's a community activity, you know. It's something between people. It's a way to talk to one another.
You can hear Outlook at 23 GMT.
It isn't easy for a mumming new neighbour into the family home and missed all the signs that he was grooming her young daughter. Both mother and daughter speak frankly about what happened.
With news every half hour, this is the BBC World Service.
On NewsHour, the next 30 minutes, the number of coronavirus deaths in the UK hits 100,000. Why did China take so long to confirm that COVID-19 can be transmitted between humans? And what will Joe Biden mean for US relations with Iran and its nuclear program? That coming up after this summary of the news.
BBC News. More than 100,000 people have now died with COVID-19 in Britain, the highest in Europe. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said he was deeply sorry for every death. He insisted his government had done everything it could to save lives. Critics have accused Mr. Johnson of being too slow to impose lockdowns and to take other measures to protect people. The British-based company AstraZeneca has said the coronavirus vaccine it has developed with Oxford University isn't yet available for purchase by private firms. The statement came after the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, said a group of private companies plan to buy 33 million doses from AstraZeneca to inoculate their staff. President Biden has signed several executive orders aimed at tackling racial inequality in the United States. One of them seeks to end the Justice Department's use of privately run prisons. Mr. Biden has also rescinded the Trump administration's ban on diversity training. Mr. Biden has had a phone call with the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. Officials said he raised concerns about the poisoning of the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny, election interference, and what he called Moscow's aggression against Ukraine. The Kremlin said Washington had agreed to extend a nuclear arms treaty that was due to expire this month. The veteran diplomat Antony Blinken has been confirmed as the U.S. Secretary of State in a Senate vote. He has promised to repair alliances strained by Donald Trump's Nigeria's Secretary of Defense Staff, the Navy and Air Force. He gave no explanation, but he has been under pressure from armed forces to quell the Islamist insurgency in the northeast. And the German coach Thomas Tuchel has been named as the new manager of the English Premier League football side Chelsea. He replaces Frank Lampard, who was sacked on Monday morning. BBC News.
Welcome back to NewsHour. In France, a court case has opened this week over the sale of Agent Orange, the highly toxic chemical used by the US government in the Vietnam War. A French-Vietnamese woman, Tran Tho Nha, is suing more than a dozen multinational firms which supplied the chemical. She says that Agent Orange, which was sprayed for 10 years by the US military as a defoliant, caused serious injury to her and to many others and damaged the environment. Experts say that recognising Vietnamese civilian victims could set an important precedent. Until now, compensation has only been given to war veterans. Her lawyer is William Bourdon.
The requirement of the US administration was to have access to a defoliant, but they did not ask to include dioxin. This was the only responsibility of the companies, to include this main toxic component in the Agent Orange.
And how has Nha said that she has suffered? Because, I mean, obviously all this happened 50 years ago.
Of course, we present to the court private medical examination, which conclude to the fact that she has been infected by dioxin. We ask as a first compensation the kind of advance of 200,000 euro in compensation for all the damage she endured.
I was reading that she has type 2 diabetes, she's had tuberculosis, she's developed a cancer.
She developed many pathologies directly linked to the infection of dioxin.
And you think that you can directly link it to dioxin?
We consider that the merits of the case are strong, but we do not underestimate all the obstacles created by the time which passed and also all the other juridical arguments which have been presented by the companies.
Well, and indeed the companies, from what I understand, essentially their defense is, look, we were asked by the US government, by the US military to supply them with herbicides. We did that. What they then did with those herbicides, how they mixed them, how they sprayed them, it's nothing to do with us.
The very classical argument of the companies when they are sued. We should consider that they act completely under the pressure of the administration. Obviously, they were not obliged to participate to the tender. Second, it's absolutely untrue to say that this should be considered as emanation of public administration, and by consequences, they should be considered as beneficiary of the immunity granted to public administration. And they say that they obey to a legitimate order. But under French law, the fact that you obey an order does not exonerate you of any kind of liability if by your own behavior you provoke a damage to a third party.
This case, you think, will take how long to decide?
Nha is 78 years old. She's sick, and the worst would be that by the multiplication of appeals that she died before the decision. And obviously we have to expect before a definitive decision between 2 and 3 years at a minimum.
That was the French lawyer William Bourdon. This is News Hour, live from the BBC World Service. I'm Tim Franks. The UK has today marked a terrible record. More than 100,000 people have died from the coronavirus. It means that Britain has one of, if not the worst death rate from the pandemic for any large country. It's certainly much worse than the US or Brazil. It fell to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, at the government's regular news briefing to make the bleak announcement.
On this day, I should just really repeat that I am deeply sorry for every life that has been lost, and of course as Prime Minister I take full responsibility for everything that the government has done. What I can tell you is that we truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life and to minimise suffering in what has been a very, very difficult stage and a very, very difficult crisis for our country, and we will continue to do that, just as every government that is affected by this crisis around the world is continuing to do the same.
And remember, that figure of 100,162 has been relatively tightly defined by the British government, that it's only those who've died within 28 days of a positive test. And to give it further context, back in March last year, the government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, said that the aim then was to try to keep the number of coronavirus deaths below 20,000.
If we can get this down to numbers 20,000 and below, that's a good outcome in terms of where we would hope to get to with this outbreak. But I mean, it's still horrible. I mean, that's still an enormous number of deaths, and it's an enormous pressure on the health service.
Numbers like these, it's a cliche to say it, but it's true, are difficult to grasp. So we thought we'd do what perhaps we don't do enough of, and that's hear about the individuals behind the statistics. It was back in March last year that Salim Barsoum became ill. He died of COVID-19 on the 6th of April. His two daughters, Ida and Sylvia, have been talking to us about their father and about their bereavement.
We didn't actually realise it was COVID, because at the time we didn't know that COVID was in the UK. We had no idea. We were all, just carrying on as normal, and then he started to feel ill, and we just didn't really understand what was going on. And then it turned out to be COVID in the end, which was our worst nightmare.
It's a very strange grief. I mean, with this grief, it's like the natural human things that you're supposed to be doing, being around family, being around friends. You can't do that. We haven't been able to properly be together as a family. And with Sylvia in particular, she, I think, has possibly, you would agree, Sylvia, I feel like she struggled the most because she's not in London. So she's, everything that she's had to do and see us, and even going to visit my father in the cemetery is through FaceTime.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was torn between getting on public transport and going to my dad's funeral, and I chose not to because I was scared, because my son's asthmatic and I didn't want to go and get the virus and bring it back home to him. And the same with, I wasn't able to be there at the funeral, so I watched it over on the phone. It just feels like you're watching a movie. It doesn't feel like this is happening to you. And still 9 months down the line, we're still in the same situation. We've had 2 lockdowns. I haven't been able to visit my dad's grave for the exact same reasons. I've seen my mum and my siblings twice in the whole time, and the first time Ida came to see me outside my door, we sobbed and we didn't hug because we were scared of passing on the virus to each other if we were carriers. I don't know. It's just been absolutely horrendous. I'm sorry. It's just been a nightmare. It's really hard. Sometimes you blame yourself because you think, could I have done something different? Could I have made a difference? It's not your fault. This is something that has come into our world and has put us in this position and has unfortunately stolen our loved ones. Just hang on in there.
get in touch with people, you feel you can talk to that understand. And I'm very, very sorry for your loss. Very sorry for your loss. Just take one day at a time. It's just the most horrendous grief. It's constant. It's just everywhere. It's in your face. There's people that are non-believers that rub it in your face. And I would say to them, please, at the time when our dad caught the virus, we didn't know this was around. You have the upper hand. You know this is around. Keep your family safe. Do not wait until you actually are hit by this loss, until you understand and believe. And have empathy for the people that have lost, because we are going through the most horrible nightmare of our lives. The next milestone is his year anniversary. 6th of April would be 1 year. I would love to be able to get together as a family and, really remember him and do, like what we would have possibly did a year ago. But we just don't know if we'll have that chance. It's very difficult to plan what's going to happen. I'd like him to be remembered as the most kindest human ever. He's such a lovely dad, amazing granddad. He would play on the floor with his grandkids, no matter if he had a backache. He'd put a smile on people's face. He'd walk into the bank and people know him. He'd walk into the supermarket, people know him. And honestly, it's a loss to lose him in this world, because he was not just my dad. He was the dad of everyone. Everyone that knows and finds out that he passed away, they are grieving like as if he was their dad too. He was just a wonderful human being.
The sisters Ida and Sylvia talking about the death of their father, Salim Bassoum. Let's head back to the very start of the pandemic. It's emerged that more than a year ago, senior World Health Organization staff expressed unease and misgivings about the lack of information coming from China when the virus first emerged in Wuhan. Audio recordings of internal WHO meetings, some of which were shared with PBS Frontline and the BBC by the Associated Press as part of a jointly produced documentary. Caroline Hawley has this report.
New Year's Eve 2019. It's 30 days since a Chinese man in his 70s became ill with a mysterious pneumonia-like disease. But the world was still blissfully unaware of the new virus that would change all of our lives.
I was in a restaurant waiting to ring in the new year, and I got a call on WeChat that it was George Gao.
George Gao is the director of China's Center for Disease Control. The man who took the call was a leading American virologist, Ian Lipkin.
He'd identified the virus, it was a new coronavirus, and that it was not highly transmissible. Well, this didn't really resonate with me because I'd heard many, many people who'd been infected. I don't think he was duplicitous. I think he was just wrong. He should have released some sequences and said, this is what we know. These are the sequences we have. My view is that you get it out. That's the way we do it, because this is too important to hesitate.
Viral pneumonia has hit central China's Wuhan city. Authorities have reported 27 cases in total, 7 of which are critical.
In China itself, news of the new disease was accompanied by reassurance that it was under control. By this point, state labs were sequencing samples from several patients. But the Chinese government hadn't shared any of the preliminary sequences with the World Health Organization, as it should have done under international protocols. References online to a new SARS-like disease had begun to be censored by the authorities, and the doctor who'd raised the alarm had been taken in by police. Larry Gosling specializes in public health law.
It was always going to be very difficult to control this virus from day one. But by the time we knew that it was transmissible human to human, I think the cat was out of the bag. It had already spread. That was the shot we had, and we lost it.
By early January, Chinese labs had the full genetic sequence of the virus, but they'd been ordered to keep quiet. And the World Health Organization first learned about the outbreak from social media. The Associated Press obtained leaked recordings of internal WHO meetings and has shared some of them with the BBC. Dr. Mike Ryan, head of WHO's Emergencies Programme, speaks of endlessly trying to get updates from China. The recordings aren't easy to hear, but his frustration is crystal clear.
There's been no evidence human transmission is not good enough. We need to see the data. We need to be able to determine for ourselves the geographic distribution, timeline, the ethnic curve, and all of that. It's absolutely important at this point.
Back in Wuhan, hospitals were filling up and hard-pressed health workers were becoming ever more alarmed. They're not allowed to talk to the international media without authorization. But one from the hospital worst hit by the outbreak has spoken anonymously to the BBC. We've revoiced their interview with an actor.
Everyone knew it was human-to-human transmission. Even a fool would know. So why say there is no human transmission? This made us very confused, and very angry. The hospital told us that we were not allowed to speak to anyone. They wouldn't even let us wear masks. They said they were afraid of causing panic among the patients.
One patient in hospital in late January was a 76-year-old man, Zhang Lifa. His son had driven across China so that he could have an operation in his hometown.
If I'd have known there was an epidemic in Wuhan, I definitely wouldn't have driven my father back.
Zhang Hai told us that his father's operation was a success. At first, he recovered well, and then he caught a fever.
When I heard them say positive, I realised they meant the coronavirus. My heart sank. It was me personally who brought him to his death. So I feel extremely guilty, but also really angry. If the Wuhan authorities had not concealed it, my father would not have left me. Because they covered it up, so many people lost their precious lives.
In all, around the world, more than 2 million people have now lost their lives to coronavirus, and many more will be living with its effects for years. China's government told the BBC in a statement that it had always acted with openness, transparency and responsibility, and in a timely fashion. But it wasn't until January the 20th, 7 weeks after the first known patient got sick, that China announced to its people that there was indeed human-to-human transmission. And by then, the virus had a deadly momentum that would carry it into every corner of the globe.
That's Caroline Hawley with that report. Plenty more about the coronavirus on our website. We've got dedicated pages to the pandemic. The lead piece on the website today is about the UK's COVID deaths. Why the 100,000 toll is so bad. An analysis from one of our health correspondents. This is NewsHour.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, where Monica Whitlock is telling the story of a secret project carried out during World War II.
Not a day goes by that the Nazis do not conduct a slaughter.
Its code name was Einik Shabbos, an life in the Warsaw Ghetto. For almost 500,000 Jewish people.
What we see in the streets, Yasadag, age 14,
hidden and recovered after the war. The voices you'll hear come from its pages.
Here is a poor woman, swollen from starvation. I can't explain.
About 100 people lived together in 3 rooms. There was no possibility of feeding them all.
Yesterday we sat up until late in the night, since we were not certain whether we would live until today.
23rd July, 7,200 people deported.
We wait for the moment that will come, we know not when.
Voices from the ghetto at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
Top story this hour, the European Union has told the makers of vaccines against COVID-19 that they must deliver the quantities they agreed as fears grow about a shortage of supply. Speaking to this programme, Rasmus Beck Hansen, the head of a firm which monitors vaccine data, said that shortages may have been caused actually by decisions made by the EU.
The key bottleneck we're seeing is really the supply of vaccines. The UK had more vaccines available than the EU has managed to secure, which is really a result of decisions made over the last year or so. And I think that's actually the key reason why the EU is now in a difficult situation, because they don't have production capacity within the EU to fully meet the need.
One other headline, the number of coronavirus deaths in the United Kingdom has passed 100,000. It's the highest level in Europe.